We're going to get down to the wire here. So we just have a couple more sections to cover. And these ones are less code heavy and more just sort of conceptual things to be aware of. So one is scope. And so scope is just a fancy word for where your variable names can be seen from. And so we've done a lot of global variables. So anytime, like if we just say, let's see, if we do, right, so if we do pressure equals 106.3, since it's not inside a function anywhere, that's effectively in the global space. And so that's, it can be handy and helpful. But again, all your variable names have to be unique. So, and then you would start getting longer and longer variable names. So you don't want to have all your variables necessarily in global space. So we sort of have these ones that are maybe super important and need to be seen from everywhere. And for the most part, you're going to want to end up with your variables in what's called local space. And that's going to be like within the body of a function, as an example. And that's super handy because think about it, like we used pandas. Pandas definitely has hundreds of functions, maybe thousands. I haven't counted them. But all of those function names and all the variables those functions are using, if we didn't have this concept of local space where they're encapsulated, then you wouldn't be able to use any of the variables that pandas already used. So you would have to come up with new names. But by having this idea of local versus global, we can eliminate all of that complexity. So you don't have to worry about what names the function writer wrote. And also the flip side, the person who wrote pandas doesn't have to worry about what function name or what variable names and functions that you're picking because they're isolated from each other effectively. So let's see an example. So if we do a function where we are going to do, we're just going to call it adjust. And we're feeding it t. And then we need our colon. And then we're going to do temperature equals t times 1.43. And we're going to divide that by pressure. And then return temperature. All right. So now if we call this one we just made, right? So if we just do just call it 80. I'm choosing it. Oh, thank you. Yep. I need to match these two, which I did not do. And it spits something out. And that's because even though this is in the body of a function, it can see outside into global space. But the opposite is not true. Things that are like other functions could not see inside and see t, right? Or temp before it's returned, because those would be isolated in local space. So this was done as a demonstration just to show you that pressure can see outside into global space, but it's not actually a good programming practice in my opinion. So ideally you would pass in pressure, not rely on your function being able to see into global space. So let's do that real quick. So let's define here. So instead of relying on it being able to see outside, I would pass in T and P, and then I would just use P here. And this would be better programming practice. And then, so when you would call it, you could pass in pressure. So I could do adjust, and I'm going to do 80 again as my T, but I would also pass in pressure and end up with the same output. So again, this was just to show you the effect of it being in global space means that it could see it. But again, I'm not going to encourage you to program that way. I want to encourage you to program this way, where you pass things into the function and then get things returned out of it, rather than relying on being able to see outside into global space. So scope is a little more, to it. There's a little more to it in Python, but those are the most two important concepts. So we definitely wanted to cover those ideas. And then it also where you might be like, oh, you might be programming something and it tells you like this doesn't exist. And you might be like, but I can see it right there. I know it exists. And then so I want you to think back to this and think about scopes. So the global space versus the local space inside the function. And if that's maybe what is leading to your error. Any questions about scope?